Hello, Mike.
Got something for you.
Jerry, what's happened?
Ah, shucks, Grandpa. I was just there at this place.
Just a minute. Now, Mike, you tell me what happened.
Just a little ruckus down near the Manson factory. One of those soapbox fellas gets up and starts hollering, down with this and down with that and down with capitalism and down with old man Manson.
Then some guy threw something and the fight started. Boy, was it swell.
I dare say.
There was Jerry in the middle of it all, so I took him into protective custody, you might say.
Oh, gosh, Grandpa, I wasn't doing it.
Anyway, I thought I'd better bring him home before he got into more trouble.
And I'm mighty glad you did, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Oh, 'twant anything. With them 6 boys of mine, there ain't a minute's peace anywhere.
So it was fun, eh, son?
Oh, sure, Gramps. Boy, I bet old man Manson's sore when he finds out. He thinks he's the most important guy in town. Well, guess we showed him.
Wait a minute, Jerry. Old man Manson may not be any more important than a lot of men. But your life at Manson's factory is pretty near the most important thing in this town.
What do you mean, Gramps?
Let's take a walk. And I'll tell you. It's like this, son. Some people can say a lot of crazy things and make a lot of rumpus, and I suppose it seems like fun to you.
Well, it sounded like a good idea at the time.
I suppose so. Well, there are a lot of people who seem to think that it's smart to criticize an established institution, like the factory. But you want to remember this, son. Anybody can criticize. Anybody can be destructive. But you ought to know what it is you're talking about before you talk.
The man on the soapbox explained everything. Now, he said...
Yes, I know what he said.
But you weren't there, Gramps.
No, but I've been there before. I've heard these terror downers, and I know the one thing that man didn't tell you was the truth about the Manson factory.
Well, what do you mean?
Well, son, that factory isn't just a building of bricks and steel. It's more than that. Far more. It's your town.
My town? Well, gee, how do you figure that?
Want your paper, Mr. Robinson?
Oh, thanks, Bobby. Let's sit down here. Now I'll tell you something about this town of ours, Jerry. It all began a long time ago, when I was young and the town was young. And there wasn't anything to it but one straggling street and a few struggling farms round about. Soil was all right, but there just wasn't anybody around to sell the crops to. But the town did have one thing. There was a man who had a dream. He had an idea, and his name was Manson. And he knew a man who had some money to invest. That was how it started. At first it was just a little factory. And then, son, things began to happen in this town. I was there, and I know. I turned the first lathe in that factory. And as the factory grew, new folks moved to town and brought their wives and families. The town began to grow. Homes and gardens began to spring up all around. Mr. Smith enlarged the old general store, and a couple of new stores were opened. I know, son. I was part of it all. I was part of that factory, and it was the factory payroll that brought all those people and all that business to our town. As a matter of fact, you were part of it all, too, but you didn't know it at the time.
Me? I didn't work at the factory.
The very night you came into this world, you became a part of it. The hospital where you were born was here because the factory was here. You see, son, the factory brought people here, and the people needed doctors and lawyers and dentists who were paid out of the money put into circulation by the factory payroll. And as the factory prospered, the whole town grew and prospered. Wages went higher, and hours of work grew less, which meant that we had more leisure time to enjoy the comforts that we were now able to buy. By this time, the success of practically every family in the town depended directly or indirectly on the success of the Manson plant.
Now, wait a second, Gramps. You don't mean everybody in town, do you?
I certainly do. See this newspaper, son?
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't think the Manson plant had much to do with a newspaper, would you now?
No, I can't see that it does.
Well, let's look at it this way. Yeah. See this advertisement? Well, Levitt's advertises to sell goods, and it sells its goods to the people in our town who have money. And the money, where does the money come from? The good big part of it starts out in the Manson payroll and finds its way through the grocer, the butcher, the filling station, and all the rest, finds its way to Levitt's store. Levitt's advertises to attract those dollars. And their advertising is what pays the expenses of this newspaper.
And they're the dollars that pay the reporters and the printers and all the other guys that work on the paper.
That's it, son. And that's only one example. Why, you can trace most everything you see in this town right straight back to the Manson plant. There are our fine schools. They grew out of a little one-room country schoolhouse. Look at our police department, the best in the state. And the fire department, too. You can't remember the old volunteer bucket brigade, but I was a member of it. It was all we had to depend on. Of course, a lot of folks think that all these things just happened by themselves, or that the town was responsible. And of course it was, in one way. But the factory paid most of the taxes that made them possible.
Yeah, I can see all that, Gramps. I can see what the Manson plant means to us in our town. But now you take those farmers you were talking about. What good's Manson's factory to them?
That's a fair question. And the answer is that it isn't only in the town where you'll find improvements that can be traced to the factory. Those few poor farms that we started out with in the township have grown into scores of modern farms that are needed to feed this community now. And don't forget, the factory is calling more and more upon the farms for raw materials as industry finds new uses for the farmers' products. And all this came about because of that man named Manson and his dream long years ago. Well, son, a lot of folks think it would be fun to destroy all that the factory stands for. But you see, that factory made your town, and when you're working against that factory, you're working against your own best interests.
Gee, Gramps, I never thought of it that way before.
Why, when you try to tear down industry, you're working against the very scheme of things that built 1,000 or 10,000 towns like ours and made this country what it is.
You mean even places that don't have factories?
I certainly do. Whether a town has grown up around one factory like ours, or whether it hasn't any factories or 50 factories, the principle is the same, Jerry. The well-being of all our people depends on some productive enterprise somewhere. Everybody's welfare can be traced back to manufacturing and industry. Storekeepers, clerks, bank presidents, lawyers, stenographers, housewives, mechanics, teachers, schoolboys. In the last analysis, their livelihood depends on the steady circulation of industrial payroll dollars. And that's why I say to you, Jerry, look around you. The story of your town is the story of America. And America, well, America is progress with liberty and democracy and peace. These are the blessings of peace and industry that belong to all of us and to our children and our children's children. And we should guard them and thank God for them, for America, every day we live.